Welcome back to Federal Insights IoT Security, sponsored by Thundercat Technologies here on Federal News Network. Our guest now is Kurt Steege. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Thundercat Technology. And Kurt, let's talk with use cases, because as we spoke earlier, there's a lot of range of technologies converging on the network, but the use cases that you're seeing across the federal government. Tell us more about IoT and how it's emerging as something, as an application.
Sure. Nice to be here again, Tom, and look forward to the conversation. It's kind of interesting there. I mean, even as far back as 2015, there was discussion. I mean, there was about over $8 billion spent on IoT technology. So these things sort of increase. In about a year or so ago, the GAO put out a survey, and in that survey, somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 out of the 90 agencies that they surveyed were all using some type of IoT. And this could be for a lot of different reasons. Many cases we were talking things like equipment monitoring. So where you're dealing with that stuff. You could be control access or accounts. I know, just before you talked with Mark about some of the convergence that you're seeing around this thing within possibly within buildings, trying to use video cameras or some other type of sensor. We kind of break them down into a couple of different sort of buckets, right? We've got large sensor networks. You look at, some of the science type stuff that's going on with either USGS or Fish and Wildlife, where you're talking about, stream buoys and things like that, and being able to pull the information back. Or you talk about more of the critical infrastructure, so power grids, nuclear facilities, things like that. Or you can also kind of go back and go, I think you had even mentioned in the last conversation about some of the military applications. So you're talking about things like drone flights and information. So pulling all that, in many cases, video information, other types of sensor information, and pulling it back internally and having that correlated.
Yeah, so it strikes me there's a lot of data types here that also have to be dealt with, and there's some technological layer somewhere in here that has to account for all of that.
Sure, and that's kind of one of the interesting things that's been coming out a lot recently with some of the ideas and technology that's been around. So not only do you have to deal with sort of the power issues that I think you mentioned before, that could be something that's wired, something that's coming from renewable energy sources like solar. If you have something in the middle of the ocean, it's kind of hard to power it any other way, right? And then you've got to deal with the comms side of it and the pulling together of comms like 5G and stuff like that. But the processing part is really interesting right now, because you're starting to see the ability to get smaller and smaller processing, to feed all the different AI and ML engines that are out there.
Yeah, so that kind of mitigates toward another piece of infrastructure, edge computing. I imagine that's probably a hot topic in IoT right now.
Yeah, I mean, all of it is the same sort of thing. It is, how you're getting this information, how you, in many cases, because of the volume, you do have to do a lot of pre-processing out there. And there's been solutions out there from groups like NVIDIA and such that are out there to get the chipset in there to make that happen. And then we kind of work that into then the transmission of that thing through ruckus networks or something like that.
And getting back to that infrastructure requirement, what do IT planners need to know in the contemporary sense? Because network technology, we kind of take it for granted nowadays because there's plugs all over the office, but what's behind that plug never ceases to evolve, just like what's on this side of the plug. Tell us what they need to know about infrastructure planning nowadays for IoT.
Well, one of the critical things, I just want to add one thing to that, but for sure, infrastructure planning is going to be important in how you're going to drive power and comms and stuff like that together to get this information and power there, because the convergence of that is critical on how we make that work. But one thing that I definitely want to mention here also that has to be taken into consideration as you're putting these things together was there was a special publication from NIST last year, 800-213, that talks about the special needs from a cybersecurity perspective around IoT specifically. One of the issues were, and I think you also mentioned this earlier, was there was all these different sort of networks, all these different sort of things that were going on, and different, these. One of the issues I've heard before, these silos of excellence that have been out there. pulling things together and having it. Now we're talking about convergence. Now we're talking about bringing the information, the network, and everything together. All those things are critical, and the cybersecurity aspects of those are also going to be more and more important as we get.
Got it. And so I guess encryption must come into this at some level, and where that
Yeah.
takes place, that's also a network consideration too.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be taking place on the devices that are out there, and then through the transmission of that information that comes back.
And I just wanted to ask you a quick question I also asked Mark, and that is, in the military, the austere environment always comes up in those conversations. Anything else to add to that whole question of how you keep this going when the environment, the network environment, is austere in terms of connectivity?
Well, there's a couple of solutions there, and you're always going to talk about those austere environments. You could be in a desert; you're going to have to deal with fanless infrastructure where you're not going to be able to get, you're going to have to deal with heat dissipation. All of these things do come into play. There's specific solutions for each one. You could be dealing, as I said before, with water buoys out there and dealing with salt contamination and things like that as well. So, all these factors come into play.
Right. So no one size fits all. You really need to do detailed planning with your vendors on what it is you're going to be doing and where.
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We've been talking to Kurt Steege. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Thundercat Technology. I'm Tom Temin. This is Federal Insights IoT Security, sponsored by Thundercat Technologies here on Federal News Network.